Hey, long time no see. You've really turned into an old lady, huh?
We're divorced, you know. Can you at least be a little more considerate with how you talk to me?
Come on. We used to be married. That's why I feel comfortable talking to you like this. So, what have you been up to since we split? You know, I get remarried right after our divorce. And right after the wedding, my wife found out she was pregnant. Seems like she was already pregnant when we got divorced. I guess if you're not infertile, having kids is pretty easy. Now, it's the three of us, me, my wife, and our son, and we're living the good life.
Glad to hear you're happy.
What about you? Oh, sorry, my bad. Guess you're still single, huh? I mean, over 30, can't have kids. Not much of a catch, are you?
I divorced him, Chris, 15 years ago because of my infertility. When we met again at our high school reunion, he couldn't stop bragging about his family, trying to show off. But Chris is seriously mistaken. Oh, who do you think is going to be single forever? It's time to clear up that misunderstanding. I'm sure he's going to be pretty upset. And while I'm at it, I'll add a little bonus. Out of pure mischief, I decided to tell Chris something I didn't really need to say. That one sentence ended up pushing Chris way past what I ever imagined, sending him into a total meltdown. I'm Amy. I'm 28 and work for a consulting firm. I'm getting married soon, and we're planning to introduce him to my parents shortly. My soon-to-be husband is Chris, also 28, and he works in sales for a major manufacturing company. He's also my childhood friend. We grew up together from kindergarten through middle school. We went to different schools starting from high school, and after graduating from college, I moved away from my hometown for work. A few years after starting my job, I found out through social media that Chris was working nearby, and we met again for the first time since middle school. Meeting up with a childhood friend after leaving our hometown and growing into adults. We ended up dating, and in a picture-perfect rom-com style, it led to our engagement.
Do you think it'll be okay? What if your dad doesn't like me?
You're overthinking it, don't worry.
Still, your dad's the CEO, isn't he? I never thought of him like that when I was a kid, but now, as a businessman, I can help but feel a bit nervous.
Chris keeps adjusting his perfectly fine tie and dabbing the sweat off his forehead with a tissue. His anxiety is contagious. Sure, my dad does run a metalworking company, but it's a small business in a quiet, rural area. It used to be a decent-sized operation, but now it's much smaller. And my dad isn't exactly the intimidating type.
If you really want her, you can have her. Just know, no returns.
Chris's tension disappeared in less than a minute thanks to my dad's laid-back attitude.
I'm not returning her, don't worry. And even if you asked for her back, there's no way I'd give Amy up.
By the end, Chris was joking around, too. My mom and I exchanged glances, a bit exasperated but relieved that everything had gone smoothly. Chris must have felt relieved too, knowing the introduction went well. Or so I thought, but on the drive home, Chris had a somewhat concerned look on his face.
Your dad told me about the factory and his company today. Is it not doing so well?
It's not doing as great as it used to, but that's just how things are nowadays.
You're a business consultant, right? Isn't there anything you can do to help?
Do you know how hard it is to turn a company around? I already have a full-time job, so there's no way I can just manage my dad's business on the side. If I were to do something, I'd have to quit my job and fully commit to working there.
I see. So, as his only daughter, you're planning to leave your job one day and take over the business, right?
No, not at all. My dad doesn't want me to go through the trouble of running the company. He plans to sell it in the future. I'm just giving him small advice now to keep things going until he retires.
Got it.
Once Chris realized there was no need to worry about my dad's business, his expression softened. Seeing him care about my dad made me happy, and I felt myself relax too. 6 months later, we got married.
I'm making coffee. Do you want your coffee, Amy?
Yeah, thanks. While I was cleaning up after dinner, Chris prepared my coffee. He even times it perfectly, making sure the coffee is ready just as I finish cleaning up so it doesn't get cold. Chris is always considerate and thoughtful. He often does things for me without me even asking, sensing what I need before I say a word. With a husband like this, I have no complaints, and our marriage is going smoothly. However, around the time we reached our second wedding anniversary, while I had no complaints about our marriage, I began to feel a certain anxiety. My relationship with Chris was great, and we had a fairly regular intimate life. But despite being married for 2 years, we still hadn't been blessed with a child.
You don't really need to worry about it, right? It'll happen when it happens.
But I'm already 30. It's natural to feel a bit anxious. Chris, lying on the couch and scrolling through his phone, casually replied to my concerns. Normally, I'd want him to take my worries more seriously and get upset at his response. But I knew Chris was intentionally keeping it light to avoid making me feel overly anxious or guilty about not being able to have kids. Like me, Chris is an only child, and his parents both worked full-time. As a result, he spent a lot of time alone at home and always longed for a family life where everyone was together. My parents worked full-time too, but I used to go to their office after school, so I was always surrounded by family and coworkers, never feeling lonely like Chris did. But I know the importance of spending time with loved ones. That's why I want to make Chris's dream of having a close-knit family come true. And besides, I want kids too. I'm going to get checked at the hospital just in case.
Do you really need to go that far?
If everything's fine, great. But if there's an issue, it's better to know what's causing it, right?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
The following weekend, I went to the hospital alone. There were 2 reasons for this. 1, I expected the doctor would probably tell me that nothing was wrong. And 2, if there was an issue, I wasn't sure how I'd react with Chris sitting right beside me. I wasn't too worried when I went to the hospital, and while waiting for my name to be called, I was already thinking about doing some shopping on the way home. The tests were quick, but I wouldn't get the results until later, so I headed home. 2 weeks later, the results came in. Why is it that in moments like these, bad news always seems to come first? After hearing the results, I skipped my usual shopping and walked home, staring at the ground. I'm infertile.
I see.
That night, after hearing the test results, I told Chris about my infertility. I chose to bring it up during dinner, hoping it would help lighten the mood a bit, but my words instantly weighed down the atmosphere, and both of us had our meals come to a halt. However, there was still some hope. Things weren't completely bleak. The doctor said my infertility could be treated and there's about a 30% chance it'll work. Once you hit 30, the odds of success keep dropping, but it seems like I'm just in time.
30%, huh? And the chances will keep getting lower, right?
As I started eating again, Chris remained still. It seemed that the number 30% felt different to each of us. When I was first told I was infertile, I felt like my hopes of having a child were shattered. When I thought I couldn't have children, hearing that there was a 30% chance gave me hope. It didn't seem like such a low number to me. But to Chris, 30% didn't seem very high. Seeing the disappointed look on his face, my eating came to a stop again. Since that day, our once smooth married life had become awkward. Are you going to be home late again tomorrow?
Yeah.
As I cleaned up the dishes, I spoke to Chris's back as he rested in the living room, but his reply was half-hearted. Since finding out about my infertility, Chris had been coming home later and later. He said work was busy, but I had a feeling he just wanted to spend less time at home. Even on weekends, he'd leave early in the morning and wouldn't return until late at night. With Chris coming home so late, I started eating dinner by myself. And soon enough, Chris stopped sleeping in our bedroom, choosing to sleep on the living room couch instead. Though he was still physically in the house, it felt like we were living separate lives. I felt lonely watching Chris drift away, but knowing the reason lay with me, I couldn't bring myself to blame him. 6 months later, our relationship had completely cooled off, and we hardly spoke at all. Today was a weekend, and as usual, Chris left early in the morning. As I watched him put on his shoes at the door, I realized a part of me felt relieved. With him gone, I could breathe a little easier and get through the laundry a bit quicker. But when I went to toss his shirt in the washing machine, I sighed. More foundation stains. These just don't come out easily. There was makeup on Chris's shirt again, but I wasn't surprised. This had been happening for the past 2 or 3 months. Our marriage had already gone cold, so I didn't feel the need to make a big deal out of cheating. Looking at the stained shirt, I realized our marriage had probably reached its end. Chris must have felt the same way. That's why he didn't bother hiding the affair, casually tossing his stained shirts into the laundry basket. That night, I brought up divorce. Chris, maybe we should just end this. If we divorce, you can be with her.
Oh, so you knew.
Don't bother pretending. I'm not going to demand alimony, so let's just make this easy, okay?
All right.
I have a job, so I don't need money. And since Chris works for a major company, asking for alimony wouldn't really hurt him either. For me, it was more important to have a clean break than to drag things out with a messy settlement. Chris must have seen this coming as he accepted the divorce without batting an eye. I'm not asking for alimony, but in exchange, I'd like to know a little bit about the woman he's seeing. It's just my curiosity. Who is she?
She's 2 years younger than me. We met through our shared hobby, fishing.
Odd, so that's where you've been going on weekends. She's okay with dating a married man? You didn't hide the fact that you're married, did you?
I've been completely honest with her. I told her I'm planning to get divorced, and we're dating with the intention of getting married. I'm getting a divorce, so now I'm just waiting for her to finalize hers.
Wait, does that mean you'll wait on her? Is this some kind of double infidelity?
No. She's just dating hers. I've successfully stolen her away from her boyfriend.
There's a lot I want to say after hearing Chris's story, but if I stir things up now, the divorce might not go as smoothly as I'd like. So I swallow my words. In the end, the divorce went off without a hitch. Chris went straight to his new partner. Apparently, she had broken up with her boyfriend as well, and they were planning to get married soon. I had prepared myself for the divorce, thinking it wouldn't bother me much. But once it actually happened, the shock hit me harder than I thought. I stayed at the house and continued working for a while, but eventually, I quit my job and moved back to my hometown. 15 years after returning to my hometown, the wounds from the divorce had finally healed, and I was completely back to my old self. The fact that I was once married had been pushed to the back of my mind, almost forgotten. As I was enjoying my new life, I received an invitation to my middle school reunion. There was a chance that Chris, my childhood friend, would attend. During our divorce, I prioritized making it smooth, so I didn't get to say everything I wanted. I didn't ask for alimony for his affair, but that didn't mean I wasn't angry. After 15 years, I decided it was time for a little payback, so I chose to attend the reunion. However, my small act of mischief would end up having a huge impact on Chris's life. On the day of the reunion, I arrived at the venue and saw many familiar faces. I quickly found myself catching up with old friends and reminiscing about the past. As I was enjoying the conversation, a face I had nearly forgotten approached me.
Hey, long time no see. Wow, you've really turned into an old lady, huh?
As soon as Chris saw me, he laughed and threw an insult my way. We're the same age, so if I'm an old lady, then aren't you an old man? I had been enjoying my conversation, but Chris's smug grin and rude comment made my friends awkwardly step back. We're divorced, remember? Couldn't you be a bit more considerate in how you talk to me?
We used to be married, so I'm just being casual. What have you been up to since the divorce? You know, right after we split, I got remarried, and my wife found out she was pregnant. Turns out she was already pregnant when we divorced. When you're not infertile, having kids is pretty easy. Now I'm living happily with my wife and son.
Good for you. I'm glad you're happy.
What about you? Oh, wait, sorry. You're infertile, right? You're probably still single, huh? Over 30, no kids. Not much of a catch, are you?
Who do you think is single? Chris began showing me pictures on his phone from family outings and bragging about his wife and son, trying to rub his happiness in my face. I found his stories boring, so I continued to listen without much expression. It seemed Chris had completely misunderstood something. Just correcting that misunderstanding would likely be enough to make him feel bitter. As I was considering how to set the record straight, a young girl came up to me at just the right moment.
Mommy, I made a new friend.
That's wonderful, sweetie. Mommy's talking to this man right now, so why don't you go play with your new friend a little longer?
Okay.
The girl happily ran off.
Hey, who was that kid?
Ha, my daughter. They said we could bring our kids today, didn't they? Look, there are other kids around too.
That's not what I meant. Did she just call you mommy?
Yes, that's my daughter, Hannah. She's 10 years old now.
But you were infertile. How do you have a kid? Oh, I get it. She's not really yours, right? A child from your second marriage?
How rude. Hannah is my biological daughter.
But how? You were infertile.
I told you infertility can be treated, didn't I? You were the one who decided it couldn't be fixed. I could hear small chuckles from those around us. My close friends already knew about my divorce and that I'd had a child. So, seeing Chris brag about his child, thinking I couldn't have one, made them laugh at him. Chris seemed to realize he was being laughed at.
So, if you have a kid, you must have gotten married again. Congrats.
His face was red with embarrassment after failing to boast about his child. Though he congratulated me on my remarriage and having a child, it was clearly an attempt to save face and act like the bigger person.
So, few would marry an old lady like you?
After an office romance.
Oh, so you're still working at that consulting firm?
Oh, you didn't know? I took over my dad's company and became the CEO. My dad hasn't retired yet, so he's still working as chairman.
What? I thought the company was going to be sold.
I decided to take it over after I moved back home post-divorce. These past 15 years were tough, but now we're about to hit $30 million in annual revenue. I guess we've moved from a small business to a mid-sized one.
What? $30 million?
It was well known among my hometown friends that I had taken over my dad's company and grown it significantly. But since Chris had no idea, he was once again laughed at by our friends.
But you told me turning a company around wasn't easy.
Exactly. But since I quit my job after the divorce, I was able to fully focus on reviving my dad's company. Growing the company wasn't easy. It was filled with challenges. When I first came back and said I'd be taking over, many employees didn't have a good impression of me. So I started by actively communicating with the employees to earn their trust. That alone took me 2 years. Once I had gained their trust, I used my consulting experience to prove my skills at work. That process took about 3 years. At one point, I pushed myself too hard at work and became physically and mentally exhausted, but my current husband supported me through it. He also stood by me during my infertility treatments, and 10 years ago, I gave birth to our daughter, Hannah. Even after having a child, I kept working hard alongside the employees for 10 more years, and before I knew it, the company had broken through the $10 million revenue barrier. Now, it's growing fast and is about to reach $30 million.
So, you're the CEO of a $30 million company.
That's right. You had no idea I had the potential to become the CEO of a $30 million company, did you? You left me because you thought I was infertile and moved on to another woman. But I had a child. So, how does that make you feel? By the way, how's your career going? Have you made it to the head of sales yet? This time, I grinned mischievously as I questioned Chris. I had no idea what position Chris held at his company now. However, in a major corporation like his, there must be plenty of competition. Seeing Chris silently clenching his teeth, I was convinced that he hadn't achieved any significant promotions. I had successfully countered his bragging about his child and taken back the upper hand with my career success. Although I was already satisfied seeing his frustrated expression, I decided to drop one more bomb. Oh, by the way, you said your wife got pregnant right after you got married, didn't you? You got married right after our divorce, but your wife also broke up with her boyfriend around the same time, right? So, are you sure?
Are you saying the kid isn't mine? He's definitely my son.
Well, saying that doesn't make it convincing, does it? You were cheating, and she was probably unfaithful too, wasn't she? The mention of infidelity, cheating, and the possibility that Chris's son wasn't his attracted everyone's attention. Soon, not only our close friends but a larger crowd gathered around us. I felt a little embarrassed by all the attention, but Chris was clearly the villain in this situation. All the cold stares were focused on him. Chris seemed to notice the growing hostility toward him and quickly slipped out of the room. Satisfied that I had embarrassed him, I resumed my conversation with friends. I had finally gotten my revenge on Chris. I figured that from now on, I wouldn't even think about him anymore. But about a month after the reunion, Chris called me. He had probably gotten my number from a friend at the reunion. Curious about what he might say, I reluctantly answered the phone.
Hey, you knew, didn't you?
I racked my brain, trying to figure out what he was talking about. But when nothing came to mind, I just asked him directly. What are you talking about?
My kid. Just like you said, he's not mine.
What? I knew I shouldn't laugh, but I couldn't help bursting out. Apparently, Chris had gotten so paranoid after what I said that he took a DNA test. The results showed that there was no biological relationship between him and his wife's child.
How did you know? And why didn't you tell me?
I didn't know. I just said that to mess with you a little, hoping you'd get anxious or maybe even start a small argument with your wife. I had no idea it was actually true. So your wife was one of those women who passes off another man's child as her own, huh?
My wife didn't know either. She thought the child was mine too.
You both thought it was yours, even though she had a boyfriend right before getting pregnant. Not checking into it was your own fault. But you've raised the child for 15 years, so even if you're not related by blood, you're still going to keep raising them, right?
No way. I've been deceived into raising another man's child for 15 years. Of course, we're getting divorced.
What? Just like during the divorce talks all those years ago, there's a lot I want to say to Chris right now. But everyone has their own values, and it's not my place to comment on someone else's family matters. So I swallowed the words that were on the tip of my tongue. So you're getting a divorce?
That's the problem. I can't.
Why can't you?
My wife won't agree to it.
After discovering the child wasn't his, Chris brought up divorce with his second wife. She put the divorce on hold and instead contacted her ex-boyfriend from 15 years ago. She was probably trying to see if she could rely on him after the divorce. But when she told him about the child, the ex-boyfriend disappeared, quit his job, and became unreachable. I can understand why he might want to run away after hearing from an ex after 15 years, telling him he had a child. Since she couldn't rely on her ex, Chris's wife refused to divorce him, fearing being left alone. She gave birth to someone else's child, right? Isn't that grounds for divorce?
That's where it gets complicated. The child was conceived before we get married, so it's not exactly infidelity. And both of us truly believed it was our child.
It sounded like Chris and his wife were in a much messier situation than I had imagined. He explained it to me in detail, but since it involved legal matters, I didn't fully grasp it. However, I understood some key points. Chris and his wife genuinely believed the child was theirs, and legally, Chris was the father. To get divorced, Chris would have to prove the child wasn't his and legally dissolve the parent-child relationship. However, there had been a previous case in the Supreme Court where DNA evidence wasn't enough to dissolve the father-child relationship, making it a tough situation. Even if Chris managed to dissolve the relationship, the fact that both he and his wife believed the child was theirs and neither investigated further meant that his wife wasn't entirely at fault. Since she hadn't intentionally deceived Chris, it was possible that a divorce based on the child might not be granted. In short, Chris's wife couldn't rely on her ex, so she refused to divorce him. Chris wanted a divorce but couldn't use the fact that the child wasn't his as a reason. That seemed to be the situation. So basically, you want to get divorced but can't?
That's right. I don't know what to do anymore. Am I going to have to keep raising another man's child?
I sighed at Chris's words. You keep saying someone else's child, but isn't that your child now?
Huh? How could they be mine? They are my wife's ex-boyfriend's kid.
I figured a little argument wouldn't hurt, so I used a stronger tone, but it seemed to have no effect on Chris. It was clear that nothing I said would get through to him. Look, I've got nothing else to say to you. You're the one who decided to divorce me because you thought I couldn't have kids, steal your second wife from her boyfriend, and not check who the father of the child was. You made those choices, so take responsibility for them. I shouted at Chris and hung up the phone. What a pathetic ex-husband crying to his ex-wife 15 years after their divorce. That day, when I came home from work, I found my husband and daughter happily watching TV together in the living room. Watching them from behind, I felt truly grateful that I had divorced Chris. Apparently, Chris still couldn't get a divorce, so he was living separately from his second wife and child. If their separation lasts for about 3 to 5 years, it could become grounds for divorce. However, until the divorce is finalized, Chris still has to pay for his wife and child's living expenses and child support. His child is already 15, so even if the divorce happens in 3 years, the child will already be an adult. His wife will probably recognize this as the right time to part ways and won't fight the divorce any further. In this situation, it's clear that Chris's second wife has the upper hand. Also, they haven't yet told the child about their biological father. Because of this, Chris's child dislikes him for leaving their home without warning. When the truth comes out, the child might actually be relieved that Chris isn't his real father, given his current feelings toward him. However, there's also a chance that learning the truth will make the child hate Chris even more. When that time comes, I hope Chris faces the child's anger head-on without running away. By then, Chris will likely have gone through his second divorce and will probably be done with marriage for good. Chris, who once tried to mock my inability to have children, ended up getting a taste of his own medicine when I one-upped him with both my family and career, and a small comment I made in passing ultimately derailed his life. If he had known how things would turn out, maybe it would have been better for him not to come after me in the first place. As for me, I'm still working hard at my job. And unlike Chris, my family is doing great. Right now, we're in the middle of a family discussion about where to go on our next holiday.